She was buried alive by her own family, left as a sacrifice in a sealed coffin. When the ancient vampire king broke it open and tore away the cloth, he froze, staring at the exact face of his queen who died 300 years ago. What he didn't know: saving her would cost him his immortality, and she would become the only thing worth dying for. The stone lid exploded outward like a cannon shot. Adrastus sat up in darkness so thick it felt solid, his lungs pulling in air that tasted of rot and centuries. His hands, pale, unmarked exactly as they'd been 300 years ago, gripped the edges of his coffin. The wood had turned to dust beneath his fingers. How long? The crypt answered with silence. Then, faintly, something else. A sound. Muffled. Desperate. Human. Help. Please. I can't breathe. Adrastus turned his head sharply. His eyes, adjusting to the pitch black, found shapes in the darkness. 3 other stone coffins lined the walls. 2 had crumbled to rubble. The third. The voice came again, weaker now. Please. Someone. He moved without thinking, his body remembering strength even if his mind still dragged through fog. The stone coffin was sealed with iron bands and a lock the size of a fist. He tore through both like paper. The lid crashed to the ground. Inside, wrapped in burial cloth so tight it molded to every curve of a body, was a girl. Her chest barely moved. The fabric over her mouth sucked inward with each strangled attempt to breathe. Adrastus reached in and ripped the cloth away from her face. She gasped, a horrible rattling sound, and her eyes flew open. Green eyes, wide with terror. And a face. Adrastus went completely still. No. Please, she choked out, still struggling against the bindings around her body. Please help me, I can't. He didn't move. Couldn't. Because he was staring at a face he'd watched turn cold in his arms 3 centuries ago. The same sharp cheekbones. The same small scar above her left eyebrow. The same way her lower lip trembled when she was afraid. Alira. Are you going to help me or just stare? The girl snapped, and that broke the spell. Because Alira had never snapped. Alira had been soft-spoken and gentle and dead. Alira was dead. Adrastus tore the rest of the burial cloth away, pulling the girl free. She tumbled forward into his arms, coughing violently, her whole body shaking. He caught her automatically, then set her down on the stone floor more carefully than he'd touched anything in 300 years. She scrambled backward immediately, pressing herself against the wall, staring at him with those impossible eyes. Who are you? She whispered. Adrastus looked down at his hands. Pale. Unmarked. The signet ring of the vampire court still on his finger. The red stone dull in the darkness. Someone who should not be awake, he said finally. His voice came out rough and used. Who are you? Why were you in that coffin? They said it was the only way. She wrapped her arms around herself. She wore a white dress, ceremonial, with embroidery at the collar. A bride's dress. They said you'd wake up hungry and you'd take me instead of the village. They said it was my duty because I look like. She stopped. Her eyes had adjusted enough to see his face now. Oh gods, she breathed. You're him. You're really him. The vampire king. Adrastus, he stood slowly, deliberately non-threatening. And you are. Lyria, she said it like she wasn't sure the name mattered anymore. They buried me alive. My own family. They buried me alive to feed to you. Something hot and vicious moved through Adrastus's chest. Rage, he realized. He'd forgotten what it felt like. The crypt trembled. Dust rained from the ceiling. Somewhere above, voices shouted. Then a sound like thunder, but wrong. Contained. They didn't just bury you, Adrastus said quietly, understanding flooding in. They're collapsing the crypt. They've rigged explosives. Lyria's face went white. What? Another tremor, stronger. A crack split the ceiling. One of the ruined coffins toppled and shattered. Can you walk? Adrastus asked. Yes. Then run. He grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the back wall, where memory told him there was a passage. Centuries of cave-ins had buried it under rubble, but when he shoved, the stones gave way like they were frightened of him. Maybe they were. They plunged into a tunnel just as the ceiling of the crypt exploded inward. The blast wave threw them forward. Adrastus twisted, taking the impact against his back, keeping Lyria crushed against his chest as they rolled through darkness and falling stone. When they finally stopped, she was gasping again, but this time from shock, not suffocation. "Move," he ordered, dragging her to her feet. "The whole structure is coming down." They ran through absolute darkness, Adrastus pulling her by the hand because he could see and she couldn't. The tunnel sloped upward, twisted left then right. Behind them, the sounds of destruction followed like a living thing. Then light, gray and weak but unmistakable. Dawn light. They burst out of the tunnel into open air, and stumbled into what had once been a courtyard. Now it was overgrown with thorns and dead vines. The stones cracked and scattered. In the distance, through the morning mist, Adrastus could see the skeleton of his castle. Collapsed. Ruin. Reclaimed by the forest. 300 years. Behind them, the tunnel entrance collapsed in on itself with a final definitive crash. Lyria fell to her knees, heaving for breath, her white dress torn and filthy. Adrastus stood perfectly still, staring at the ruins of everything he'd once ruled. Then he looked down at the girl, at the face that wore his dead queen's features like a curse. "You are under my protection now," he said quietly. Lyria looked up at him confused, terrified. Alive? What? Anyone who buries someone alive forfeits all claim to them. His voice was cold, absolute, final. "You are under my protection, and I do not give up what is mine." Lyria couldn't stop shaking. They'd been walking for hours, or maybe minutes, she couldn't tell anymore. Time had become elastic, stretching and snapping back without warning. The Vampire King moved ahead of her through the forest like a ghost, silent and impossibly fast, even when he slowed for her to keep up. She stumbled over a root and caught herself against a tree. Her legs felt like water. Adrastus stopped immediately and turned back. "How badly are you hurt?" "I'm fine. You're limping." I said I'm fine. The words came out sharper than she intended, but she couldn't help it. Everything felt raw, like her skin had been peeled away. "Where are we going?" "Somewhere safe." "That's not an answer." He looked at her for a long moment, and Lyria realized this was the first time she'd actually seen him in daylight. The stories had always said vampires burned in the sun, turned to ash, screamed in agony. But Adrastus just looked tired, ancient. The sunlight made his pale skin seem almost translucent, and there were shadows under his eyes that hadn't been visible in the crypt's darkness. "There's a keep in the mountains," he said finally. "An old military outpost. No one's used it in centuries. We'll rest there. And then what? Then we figure out why you have my dead wife's face." Lyria's stomach dropped. "I don't. I'm not." "I know." His voice was flat, emotionless. "You're not her. But you look exactly like her, and that means something. Curses don't create coincidences." He turned and kept walking, leaving Lyria to follow or not. She followed. The keep appeared through the morning mist like something from a fever dream. A small stone fortress perched on a ridge, half swallowed by ivy and mountain laurel. Most of the outer wall had collapsed, but the main tower still stood, defiant against time. Adrastus pushed open the heavy wooden door with one hand. It groaned but gave way. Inside smelled of dust and old stone and something else. Something that made Lyria think of dried flowers and faded perfume, like ghosts of better days. The main room was circular, with a cold fireplace and furniture covered in sheets so old they'd turned gray. Tapestries hung on the walls, their colors muted but still visible. Hunting scenes, court ceremonies. And in the center of the largest tapestry, Lyria's breath caught. A woman, dark hair, green eyes, that same small scar above her left eyebrow. Elira, Adrastus said quietly, following her gaze. My queen. I'm not her, Lyria whispered. I know. He moved to the fireplace and began pulling away old branches and debris. But someone wanted me to think you were. Someone wanted me to wake up, find you and believe. He stopped. It doesn't matter what they wanted me to believe. Sit. Rest. I'll make a fire. You know how to make a fire. He glanced back at her, and for the first time, something almost like amusement flickered across his face. I'm a vampire, not an invalid. I was human once. Lyria sank onto one of the sheet-covered chairs, ignoring the puff of dust. Her whole body ached. When? A very long time ago. That's not an answer. You ask a lot of questions for someone who was nearly buried alive this morning. Maybe that's why I'm asking. Lyria pulled her knees up to her chest, suddenly cold despite the late spring warmth. If I'm going to die anyway, I'd like to know who I'm dying with. Adrastus went very still. Then he straightened and turned to face her fully. You are not going to die, he said, and there was something in his voice that made it sound like a law of nature. Absolute. Unchangeable. Do you understand me? Whatever curse brought you into this, whatever plot put you in that coffin, you are not going to die. I won't allow it. You don't even know me. I know you were innocent. I know you were wronged. That's enough. He said it so simply, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Like protecting her was as natural as breathing. Lyria felt something crack open in her chest. Something that had been holding her together since the moment her father had told her about the honor of being chosen. Since her mother had dressed her in the white gown. Since her brother had refused to meet her eyes as they led her to the coffin. They didn't even say goodbye, she whispered. My family. They put me in that box and sealed it and left me there to suffocate. And I kept thinking someone would come back. Someone would change their mind. But no one did. Adrastus crossed the room and crouched in front of her chair. Up close, she could see his eyes weren't black like she'd thought. They were dark blue, the color of the sky before a storm. Then they don't deserve you, he said quietly. And they will never touch you again. This I swear. Why? The word came out broken. Why do you care? He was quiet for a moment, studying her face. That face that wasn't his, that belonged to someone 3 centuries dead. Because someone should have, he said finally. And no one did. He stood and went back to the fireplace, and within minutes had coaxed flames from the old wood. Lyria watched the fire grow, feeling warmth seep slowly back into her bones, and wondered what kind of monster kept his promises to strangers. Or if maybe he wasn't a monster at all. In the village of Thornhaven, the bells began ringing at noon. Not the gentle morning bells that called people to prayer. Not the evening bells that marked the end of work. These were the alarm bells, sharp, frantic, the sound of pure terror. Mara Ashton stood in her kitchen, hands frozen over the bread dough she'd been kneading, and felt her heart stop. No, she whispered. No, it worked. It had to have worked. Her husband burst through the door, face white as milk. The crypt didn't collapse properly. The charges went off, but Mara, there are travelers on the North Road. They saw someone coming out of the ruins. 2 people. The bowl slipped from Mara's hands and shattered on the floor. Lyria. The name came out like a prayer. Is she? One of them was a girl in a white dress. Her husband's voice shook. The other was. They said he moved wrong. Too fast. Too pale. Mara, they said his eyes reflected the light like an animal's. Oh gods, Mara sank into a chair, her legs giving out. Oh gods, what have we done? By evening, the whole village had gathered in the square. Father Dominic stood on the church steps, his ceremonial robes making him look bigger than his thin frame warranted. But his hands trembled as he raised them for silence. The Vampire King has awakened, he announced, and the crowd's murmur rose to a roar. But the sacrifice was successful. He took the girl and left. We are safe. The prophecy has been fulfilled. Safe. A woman's voice cut through the noise. My daughter is dead and you call us safe. Mara pushed through the crowd, her face streaked with tears. You promised. You said if we gave her up, he'd sleep for another 300 years. You said. The girl was willing, Father Dominic said, but his voice had lost its conviction. She understood her duty. She was terrified. Mara screamed. She begged us not to do it. And we put her in that box anyway. We buried our daughter alive like animals and you. Enough. The voice belonged to Thomas Ashton, Lyria's older brother. He stood near the back, arms crossed, face hard. What's done is done. Lyria knew what was required. She was cursed anyway. Better she die with purpose than waste away waiting for it. Mara turned on him, eyes blazing. She was your sister. She was a dead woman walking. Thomas's jaw tightened. The moment she was born with that face, her fate was sealed. At least this way the village survives. Does it? An old woman's voice, sharp as glass. Grandmother Yaga stepped forward, leaning on her gnarled walking stick. You think the vampire king will be satisfied with one girl? You think he'll go back to sleep now? The prophecy said. The prophecy said nothing about him going back to sleep. You fools, Grandmother Yaga spat on the ground. It said he would awaken when the cursed bloodline matured. It said he would come for the girl who wore his queen's face. And now he has her. But the prophecy never said what he'd do next. Silence fell over the square like a blade. Father Dominic's face had gone gray. What are you saying? I'm saying we've woken a monster, given him exactly what he wanted, and assumed he'd be grateful. The old woman's laugh was bitter. I'm saying we've signed our own death warrants. 20 miles away, in a tavern called the Crooked Crown, a merchant named Peter was drinking away his nerves. I'm telling you what I saw, he said for the third time, voice rising as the other patrons leaned in. Coming down from the mountain pass at dawn. A man, if you could call him that, carrying a girl. Her dress was white, torn, covered in dirt. And him. Peter took another gulp of ale. His skin was so pale I thought he was sick. But then he turned and looked at me, and I swear on my mother's grave, his eyes weren't right. Weren't human. What did you do? Someone asked. What do you think I did? I ran my horse the other way so fast I nearly broke its legs. Peter's hand shook around his mug. But I heard him say something to her. Clear as day, even from that distance. He said, You're safe now. Safe. A woman laughed nervously. From a vampire. That's what he said. Peter looked around the table, face haunted. And here's the strange part. She wasn't fighting him. Wasn't screaming. She was just walking beside him, like she'd chosen to be there. The tavern door banged open. A hunter stood in the entrance, crossbow on his back, silver bolts gleaming at his belt. Behind him, 3 more hunters filed in, each armed to the teeth. We're heading north, the lead hunter announced. The vampire king has awakened and taken a bride. The Hunters Guild is offering 5,000 gold pieces for his head. Another 1,000 for the girl if she's still alive. The tavern erupted in chaos. Some men jumping to volunteer, others scrambling for the exit, women clutching their children close. Peter just sat there staring into his ale, remembering the way the vampire had looked at the girl. Not like prey. Like something precious. Gods help us all, he muttered. In the mountain keep, Lyria slept by the fire, finally warm, finally safe. And Adrastus stood at the window, watching the road below, where torches had begun to appear in the distance. Coming closer. He smiled without humor. Let them come. Lyria woke to find Adrastus standing at the window, unnaturally still. Dawn light crept across the floor, but he didn't flinch from it. You don't burn, she said, her voice rough with sleep. Old vampires don't. He didn't turn around. The sun weakens us, makes us slower, cloudier in thought. But we don't burn. That's a myth humans tell themselves to feel safer at noon. She sat up, wincing at the stiffness in her muscles. How old are you? Old enough to remember when this keep was built. He finally turned. and she saw his face was troubled. "We need to leave today." "Why? I thought you said we were safe here." "I was wrong." He crossed to the table where he'd laid out bread and cheese, stolen from somewhere, she assumed. "Last night while you slept I felt something. A summoning. A summoning. From the vampire court. What's left of it anyway?" He said it like the words tasted bitter. "They know I'm awake. And they know about you." Lyria's stomach dropped. "How?" "Vampires feel each other across distances. It's like a pulse in the blood. When I woke, every vampire within 100 miles felt it." He pushed the food toward her. "Eat quickly. We have a long journey." "Where?" "The moonlit valley. It's where the court convenes in times of crisis." His jaw tightened. "And apparently my resurrection qualifies." They traveled through the forest, avoiding roads. Adrastus moved like a shadow, and Lyria did her best to keep up. By midday, her feet were bleeding in her thin slippers, but she didn't complain. Something in his face told her speed mattered more than comfort. As the sun began to set, the trees opened onto a valley carved between two mountains. In the dying light, Lyria could see stone pillars arranged in a circle, ancient, weathered, covered in symbols she didn't recognize. And standing among them were figures. 7 of them. All impossibly beautiful. All impossibly still. "Stay behind me," Adrastus murmured. "Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't look them in the eyes. And whatever you do, don't show fear. That's a lot of rules. That's how you stay alive." They descended into the valley. As they approached, the figures resolved into individuals, 3 women for men, each dressed in clothing from different eras. One woman wore a gown from centuries past. A man wore what looked like ancient Roman armor. Another was dressed in furs that belonged to an age even older. The eldest-looking vampire, a man with silver hair and eyes like chips of ice, stepped forward. "Adrastus," his voice carried across the valley like a bell. "The sleeping king awakens at last. We had begun to think you'd chosen to fade into dust rather than face the world again." Lord Casimir Adrastus inclined his head slightly, respect but not submission. "I had no intention of waking. Someone else made that choice for me." All 7 vampires turned their attention to Lyria. She felt their gazes like physical weight, pressing down on her shoulders. Her knees wanted to buckle, but she locked them and lifted her chin. "Don't show fear." "Impossible," a woman breathed. She wore a green velvet dress, her auburn hair cascading past her waist. "She has Alira's face." "Not just her face," another vampire said, circling Lyria slowly. "Look at her hands, the shape of her ears, even that little scar above her eyebrow. It's perfect." "She's not Alira," Adrastus said flatly. "Obviously," Casimir replied. "Alira is 300 years dead. But this girl is something equally interesting," he smiled, showing teeth too white, too sharp. "She's the cure." Lyria's heart hammered. "The cure for what?" "For our king's weakness," Casimir gestured to Adrastus. "When Alira died, Adrastus went mad with grief. He slaughtered half the court, burned 3 villages, and nearly destroyed himself in the process. The remaining nobles had to use blood magic to put him to sleep, to save him from himself. But the spell had a cost. When he woke, he would be diminished, weakened." "I feel fine," Adrastus said coldly. "Do you?" The woman in green stepped closer. "Can you move as fast as you once did? Are your senses as sharp? Could you command a lesser vampire with just your will?" She paused. "No, because the power you lost is tied to Alira's death. To break the curse fully, you need her blood. She's not Alira, but she carries Alira's essence, her line, her curse." Casimir's smile widened. "The spell that weakened you can be reversed. All you have to do is drain the girl. Take every drop, and you'll be whole again." The valley went utterly silent. Lyria couldn't breathe. She looked at Adrastus, waiting for him to deny it, to refuse to. "No," he said simply. Casimir's smile vanished. What? I said no. Adrastus moved, placing himself between Lyria and the other vampires. She's under my protection. Are you mad? The woman in green hissed. This is your chance to reclaim everything you lost. Your full power, your throne, your... I don't want it. You don't. Casimir stared at him like he'd spoken in tongues. Adrastus, think carefully. We need you at full strength. The human kingdoms are growing bold. Hunters multiply by the year. Without a strong king, the vampire courts will fall. Then they fall. Adrastus's voice was iron. I will not kill an innocent to reclaim power I never asked for. The Roman vampire stepped forward, hand on his sword. Then you're not fit to be king. Perhaps not. Adrastus smiled, and it was a terrible thing. But I'm still strong enough to kill anyone who touches her. Would you like to test that theory, Marcus? The tension snapped tight as a wire. Casimir raised a hand, stopping Marcus. This is not over, old friend. The court will convene again tomorrow night. We will discuss this properly. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a threat. They didn't return to the keep. Adrastus led Lyria away from the valley as soon as the vampires dispersed into the darkness, moving fast through the forest. She stumbled trying to keep up, branches whipping at her face and arms. Where are we going? She gasped. Away from here. They'll come for you tonight if we stay close. But you said. I said you're under my protection. That doesn't mean they'll honor it. He grabbed her hand and pulled her faster. The court is fracturing. Half of them see you as a tool. The other half see you as a threat to their plans for a new regime. Either way, you're not safe. They emerged onto a road just as the moon rose, full and bright, turning everything silver. In the distance, Lyria could see the dark outline of a bridge spanning a river gorge. We'll cross there, Adrastus said. On the other side is neutral territory. The court won't follow without risking war with the human kingdoms. And then what? He looked at her, and for the first time she saw uncertainty in his face. Then we find answers. Someone cursed you to look like a Lyra. Someone placed you in that coffin at the exact moment I would wake. This wasn't random, Lyria. This was planned. By who? That's what we need to find out. They started across the bridge, old stone, narrow with no railings. Below, the river churned white over rocks 50 feet down. The sound of rushing water filled the air, making it hard to hear anything else. Which is why they didn't hear the vampire until she was already there. The woman in the green velvet dress appeared at the far end of the bridge, blocking their path. Her auburn hair lifted in an unfelt wind, and her eyes glowed faintly in the moonlight. Lady Seraphine, Adrastus said quietly, stopping. Stand aside. I can't do that. Seraphine's voice was gentle, almost apologetic. You're making a mistake, old friend. That girl is the key to restoring everything we lost. She's a person, not a key. She's a cursed bloodline walking. Seraphine took a step forward. Do you know what will happen if you don't drain her? The curse doesn't just affect you, Adrastus. It affects all of us. Every vampire tied to your court. We're all weakening because you chose to sleep rather than move on from Alira's death. Then you'll have to learn to live weakened. Will we? Another step. Or will we simply choose a new king? One who understands that sacrifices must be made for the greater good. Behind them, footsteps. Lyria spun to see Marcus, the Roman vampire, standing at the other end of the bridge. His sword was drawn. They were trapped. This doesn't have to be violent, Seraphine said. Just give us the girl. Walk away. You can sleep again or wander or fade into obscurity. But don't throw away our entire civilization for one human. No. Adrastus's hand moved to Lyria's wrist, his grip gentle but firm. Final answer. Seraphine's face hardened. Then you force our hand. She moved, impossibly fast, a blur of green velvet and white hands reaching for Lyria. Adrastus was faster. He shoved Lyria behind him and caught Seraphine's wrist mid-strike. The impact of their collision sent a crack through the bridge's stonework. "Run!" he shouted at Lyria. "Where?" "Anywhere." Marcus charged from behind. Lyria pressed herself against the bridge's low wall as he passed, his sword swinging in an arc meant for Adrastus's neck. But Adrastus ducked, still holding Seraphine, and used her momentum to throw her directly into Marcus. They collided with a sound like thunder. "The side!" Adrastus snapped at Lyria. "Climb down to the riverbank. That's a 50-foot drop. There are handholds in the stone. It's an old smuggler's route. Go. Now!" Seraphine recovered first, launching herself at Adrastus again. This time her fingernails had extended into claws, and when she raked them across his chest, blood bloomed black in the moonlight. Lyria hesitated for one more second, then made her choice. She swung herself over the wall and found the first handhold carved into the ancient stone. Her fingers screamed as she gripped the rough rock, her feet scrabbling for purchase. Above, she could hear the sounds of fighting. Impacts that shook the bridge, growls that didn't sound human. She climbed down 3 feet. 5. 8. Then Marcus appeared above her, leaning over the wall, his face twisted with rage. "The king protects you," he hissed. "But he can't save you from gravity." His boot came down on her fingers. Lyria screamed and lost her grip. She fell, and strong hands caught her. Adrastus had jumped from the bridge. He hit the rocky slope beside the river in a crouch, absorbing the impact with inhuman grace. Lyria cradled against his chest. "Hold on," he said. Above them, Seraphine and Marcus appeared at the bridge's edge. "You can't run forever," Seraphine called down. "Watch me," Adrastus replied. He ran. Not human speed. Not even close. He moved like flowing water, leaping from rock to rock along the riverbank, each jump carrying them dozens of feet. Lyria buried her face in his shoulder and held on, feeling his cold skin, his impossible strength, the steady rhythm of movement that never faltered. Behind them, the vampires gave chase. But Adrastus had always been the fastest. Even weakened, even cursed, even 300 years out of practice, he was still the vampire king. And he didn't drop what he protected. They vanished into the forest on the far side of the river, leaving Marcus and Seraphine standing on the bridge, watching their king choose a human girl over his throne. "This means war," Marcus said quietly. Seraphine smiled, cold and calculating. "I was counting on it." They traveled for 2 days, avoiding roads and settlements, sleeping in abandoned barns and hollow trees. Adrastus barely spoke, and Lyria was too exhausted to press him. But on the 3rd morning, when they crested a hill and she saw the village below, she stopped walking. "No," she said flatly. "Anywhere but there." Thornhaven spread out in the valley like a wound. Thatched roofs, cobbled streets, the church steeple rising above it all. Her home. The place that had buried her alive. "We need answers," Adrastus said. "Someone in that village knows why you were cursed. Why you have Alira's face. They'll kill me. Or try to kill you. Or both. Let them try." He started down the hill. "Come. The sooner we get answers, the sooner we can leave." Lyria followed because she had nowhere else to go. They reached the village at noon, when the sun was highest and Adrastus was weakest. He'd planned it that way, she realized, arriving when he looked most human, most vulnerable, less likely to cause panic. It didn't work. The first person to see them was old Peter, leading his cart to market. He took one look at Lyria's face, went white as milk, and dropped his entire load of turnips. They rolled across the street like severed heads. "Ghost," he whispered. "Sweet merciful gods, she's a ghost." "I'm not dead, Peter," Lyria said tiredly. "You but we the coffin." He couldn't form complete sentences. His eyes darted to Adrastus, and whatever he saw there made him stumble backward. "Vampire. Vampire." The word rang out like a bell. Doors slammed. Shutters banged closed. Within seconds, The street was empty except for the three of them and a scatter of turnips rolling into the gutter. "Welcoming place," Adrastus observed dryly. "You have no idea." They walked toward the church. Behind curtained windows, Lyria could feel eyes watching. She heard whispers, gasps, the sound of children being pulled away from windows. Every step felt like wading through shame. The church doors were locked. Adrastus raised an eyebrow. "A house of God that bars its doors. They're scared." "They should be." He placed one hand flat against the wood. "Father Dominic, I know you're in there. Open the door or I'll remove it." Silence. Then slowly the sound of a bolt sliding back. The door cracked open. Father Dominic's face appeared. Older than Lyria remembered, haggard with dark circles under his eyes. He looked at her and flinched. "Lyria, you're alive." Disappointed. The bitterness in her voice surprised even her. No, child, He stopped seeing Adrastus. "My lord, please, come inside. Quickly, before the villagers do something foolish." The church was dim and cool, smelling of incense and old wood. Father Dominic locked the door behind them and leaned against it, breathing hard. "I never thought you'd survive," he said to Lyria. "I prayed for your soul every night, but I never thought." "You put me in that coffin," Lyria cut him off. "You blessed the burial cloth. You told my parents it was God's will. It was the only way to save the village." "From what?" Adrastus's voice was quiet, but it filled the church like thunder. "What exactly did you think you were saving them from?" Father Dominic looked between them, his face crumbling. "From the curse. From the prophecy. From you, my lord." "Explain." The priest moved to the altar, his shoulders slumped. When he turned back, he looked like he'd aged 10 years. 30 years ago, a wandering witch came to Thornhaven. She was dying plague, I think. We gave her shelter, food, tried to save her. But she died anyway, he swallowed hard. "Before she died, she cursed us. Said the vampire king would wake when the moon turned red, and he would drain this village dry in revenge for." "And Lyria?" Adrastus's eyes were cold. "The witch said the king would wake when a girl child was born bearing his queen's face. That this child would be the key, drain her blood at the moment of his waking, and the king would sleep another 300 years." Father Dominic's voice broke. "When Lyria was born with that face, with that scar exactly like the old paintings, we knew. We thought we had time. But then 3 months ago the blood moon rose and we felt the earth tremble. We knew you were waking. So you buried my daughter alive," a voice said from the shadows. Lyria spun. Her mother stepped out from behind a pillar, her face streaked with tears. Behind her came Thomas, her brother, and her father, each of them looking hollowed out, like they'd stopped sleeping weeks ago. "Mama," Lyria whispered. Mara rushed forward and stopped 3 feet away, as if afraid to touch her. "I thought you were dead. I thought, oh gods, Lyria, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry doesn't undo what you did," Adrastus said flatly. "You buried your own child. Alive, conscious, terrified. We thought it was the only way. There's always another way." He turned back to Father Dominic. "This curse, can it be broken?" The priest hesitated. "There are rumors, old legends. The Queen's mausoleum, 3 days' travel north. They say Alira's tomb holds a ritual that can sever cursed bloodlines. But my lord, the mausoleum is in ruins. Dangerous. Haunted by. I don't care if it's guarded by the gods themselves." Adrastus looked at Lyria. "Do you want to break this curse?" She thought about her mother's tears, her family's hollow faces, the village that had thrown her away to save themselves. "Yes," she said. "I want to be free." "Then we go north." He turned to leave, then paused. "And father? If I ever find you've harmed anyone else in the name of prophecy, I will come back. And your God won't save you." They left the church. Behind them, Mara collapsed sobbing into her husband's arms. And Father Dominic stared at the altar, wondering if he'd just saved the village, or doomed it. The inn called the Wayward Stag sat at a crossroads 2 days north of Thornhaven, exactly the sort of place where travelers stopped to rest before the harder roads ahead. Adrastus had wanted to keep moving through the night, but Lyria was stumbling with exhaustion, and even he had to admit she needed real rest. "One night," he'd said. "We leave at dawn." Now, as Lyria lay in the small room upstairs, she wondered if she'd ever feel safe enough to actually sleep. The bed was lumpy but clean. The room was plain, just the bed, a wash basin, a single window overlooking the courtyard. Adrastus had taken the room next door. Though she suspected he wouldn't sleep. Vampires didn't need to, he told her. They could go weeks without rest if necessary. She closed her eyes and tried to quiet her racing mind. Thoughts came anyway, unbidden. Her mother's face in the church. The way Thomas wouldn't look at her. The casual way Seraphine had tried to kill her on the bridge like swatting a fly. And Adrastus. Always Adrastus standing between her and death, over and over again. Why? He said it was because she'd been wronged. But people were wronged every day, everywhere. Why did this ancient king care about one cursed girl? Sleep took her before she found an answer. She woke to a hand over her mouth. Lyria's eyes snapped open. The room was dark, too dark. The candle she'd left burning had been snuffed out. And standing over her bed were 2 figures, their eyes reflecting the moonlight like animals. Vampires. She tried to scream, but the hand pressed harder, cutting off air. "Quiet, little curse," a male voice whispered. "Make a sound and your precious king dies tonight." The other vampire, a woman with silver hair, produced a cloth from her belt. The sweet, chemical smell hit Lyria's nose, and she understood too late. Poison. Sleeping poison. She thrashed, trying to buck them off, trying to reach the wall to bang for help. But vampire strength was absolute. They held her down like she weighed nothing at all. The cloth pressed over her nose and mouth. The world went gray at the edges. Adrastus, she thought desperately. Adrastus, please. Everything went black. When Lyria woke, she was moving. She kept her eyes closed, fighting through the drug-induced fog, trying to assess. She was draped over someone's shoulder. Vampire had to be, from the supernatural steadiness of movement and the cold that radiated through her dress. Around her, she heard multiple footsteps. At least 4, maybe 5 vampires traveling together. "Should have killed the king when we had the chance," a male voice was saying. Low, bitter. Casimir's orders were clear, the silver-haired woman. "Take the girl. Let Adrastus follow if he wants. Lead him to the mausoleum." "Why? What's the point?" "Because that's where we crown a new king. On the bones of the old queen, with the blood of her cursed descendant. It's poetic." A pause. "And it will destroy Adrastus to watch." Lyria's blood turned to ice. "He'll fight," another voice warned. "Of course he'll fight. He's been fighting for 3 centuries, against his nature, against his grief, against everything that would let him be strong again." The silver-haired woman laughed softly. "That's why he's weak. That's why he'll lose." They walked for what felt like hours. Lyria tried to track direction by the wind, by sounds, but the drug made everything fuzzy. Eventually she felt the air change, colder, damper. Stone walls around them. An enclosed space. They'd arrived. Someone dumped her roughly onto a flat surface. Stone cold and smooth. She let herself flop like a rag doll, still pretending unconsciousness, trying to buy time to think. "Bind her," the silver-haired woman commanded. "And someone check the perimeter. If Adrastus is following, I want to know before he arrives." Hands gripped Lyria's wrists, wrapping them in rope. Then her ankles. She risked cracking one eye open, the barest sliver. She was in a cathedral, or what remained of one. The roof had partially collapsed, letting moonlight stream through. Broken stained glass littered the floor in rainbow shards. And she was lying on what looked like an altar, positioned directly under a massive cracked window depicting a woman with dark hair and green eyes. "Alira, How long until the ritual? One of the vampires asked. Dawn. The curse breaks at dawn, when day and night are balanced. The silver-haired woman moved into Lyria's limited view. And then we drain her, use her blood to crown Casimir as the new vampire king, and finally move forward into the modern age. No more clinging to the past. No more weak kings who choose humans over their own kind. What about Adrastus? He can watch his precious human die, or he can try to stop us and die himself. Either way, his reign ends tonight. Lyria's heart hammered so hard she was sure they'd hear it. She had to do something. Had to warn Adrastus, had to escape, had to... She's awake, a male voice said flatly. Lyria's eyes snapped fully open. The silver-haired vampire stood over her, smiling. Hello, little curse. Welcome to your final performance. Adrastus will kill you, Lyria said, voice rough. Adrastus will try. But we've been preparing for this since the moment he chose you over his power. She leaned close. Did you really think you were special? You're not. You're just a tool. A very useful, very temporary tool. Outside in the distance, Lyria heard something. A roar, inhuman, ancient, filled with rage. Adrastus had found them. The silver-haired vampire's smile widened. Right on time. Places everyone. Let's give our king a show he'll never forget. The vampires melted into the shadows. And Lyria, bound on the altar under Alira's broken window, could only wait and pray that Adrastus would reach her before the sun rose. The cathedral doors exploded inward. Adrastus stood in the entrance, silhouetted against the pre-dawn darkness. His clothes were torn, covered in dirt and blood, not all of it his own. His eyes burned with something that went beyond rage, beyond fury, something primal and terrible. Let her go, he said quietly. The silver-haired vampire, Lady Morgana, Lyria remembered now, stepped out from behind a pillar, clapping slowly. Such a dramatic entrance. You always did have a flair for theater, Adrastus. Last warning, Morgana. Or what? You'll kill us all. She laughed. Look at yourself. You can barely stand. We've been leading you on a chase for hours, wearing you down. And the sun is coming, she gestured to the shattered rose window above, where the sky was already turning gray. In your weakened state, dawn might actually kill you. Ironic, isn't it? Adrastus took a step forward. Two of the vampires rushed him from the sides. He moved like lightning. The first vampire, the male who'd carried Lyria, swung a blade. Adrastus caught his wrist, twisted, and the bone snapped with a sound like a breaking branch. Before the vampire could scream, Adrastus drove his hand through the creature's chest and ripped out his heart. The vampire crumbled to dust. The second attacker skidded to a stop, suddenly reconsidering. Anyone else? Adrastus asked, dropping the heart. It turned to ash before it hit the ground. 3 more vampires emerged from the shadows. Then 2 more. 6 total plus Morgana. 7 against 1. The odds are not in your favor, old king, Morgana said. They never are. He attacked. What followed was chaos. Adrastus moved through the vampires like a storm through wheat, brutal, efficient, unstoppable despite his weakened state. One vampire went down with her throat torn out. Another lost his head to a piece of broken pillar Adrastus wielded like a club. But there were too many. A blade caught him across the ribs. Claws raked his back. He fell to one knee, and they swarmed him like wolves. Adrastus! Lyria screamed, struggling against her bonds. He looked up at her, just for a second, just long enough for their eyes to meet, and in his face she saw something that broke her heart. I'm sorry. Then Morgana was there, a silver dagger in her hand, driving it toward his heart. Adrastus caught her wrist inches from his chest. His hand shook with effort, and blood ran down his arm, but he held her. You should have taken the power when you had the chance, Morgana hissed. You could have been a god. I'd rather die human, he said. Then he headbutted her so hard her nose shattered. Morgana stumbled back, shrieking. Adrastus surged to his feet and threw off the vampires clinging to him. He vaulted over a broken pew, grabbed a piece of the ruined altar, and hurled it at the two vampires blocking his path to Lyria. One dodged. The other took the stone column to the chest and went down hard. Adrastus reached the altar where Lyria was bound. "Close your eyes," he said. "What?" "Close them." She squeezed her eyes shut. She felt him grab the ropes binding her wrists, felt the burn as they came off, and then she was being lifted, pulled against his chest as he ran. "Hold on to me," he commanded. She wrapped her arms around his neck and held on for her life. He ran for the far wall, not the door, the wall itself. At the last second he turned and smashed through it backwards, his body taking the impact of the breaking stone. They tumbled out into the cathedral graveyard, rolling across moss-covered graves. Adrastus came up in a crouch, Lyria still in his arms, his back to a massive stone crypt. The 6 remaining vampires poured out of the hole in the wall. Morgana stood at the center, her face already healed but twisted with rage. "There's nowhere left to run," she said. "And the sun is rising." She was right. The sky had turned from gray to pale blue. Any minute now, the sun would crest the horizon. "I don't need to run," Adrastus said. He set Lyria down gently behind him, using his body as a shield. "I just need to last until dawn. You think the sun will save you? It'll kill you first. Maybe, but I'll take you with me." Morgana snarled and lunged. The fight that followed was savage. Adrastus was slower now, weaker, but he fought like something with nothing left to lose. Every blow he took he returned threefold. Every wound they gave him he ignored. Lyria watched in horror as he killed another vampire, then another. But there were still 4 left, and he was bleeding from a dozen wounds. The sun touched the horizon. Golden light spilled across the graveyard like liquid fire. The vampires hissed and retreated into the shadows of the cathedral. Adrastus stood in the full light of dawn, swaying slightly. He didn't burn. But he was fading. Lyria could see it. His skin growing more translucent, his movements slower. The sun was draining what little strength he had left. "Adrastus," she whispered, reaching for him. He collapsed. Lyria caught him, or tried to. They both went down in a heap on the wet grass. His head ended up in her lap, and she could see how pale he was, how his eyes struggled to focus. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "I tried to get you out. I tried." "Shoo. You did. You got me out." Not far enough, his eyes drifted closed. "Not safe. Adrastus, stay awake. Please." From the cathedral she heard Morgana's laughter. "When the sun sets, little curse, we finish this. And your king won't be there to save you." Lyria looked down at the vampire who'd sacrificed everything for her, and realized she'd rather die than let them win. Lyria had approximately 12 hours until sunset. She dragged Adrastus into the shadow of the largest crypt, out of the direct sunlight. He was unconscious, his breathing so shallow she had to press her ear to his chest to confirm he was still alive, or whatever the vampire equivalent was. Inside the ruined cathedral, she could hear the remaining vampires moving around, waiting. 4 of them plus Morgana. They couldn't come out in the sun, but they didn't need to. They just had to wait for nightfall. "Think," Lyria muttered to herself. "Think, think, think." She had no weapons, no allies, no plan. Just a dying vampire king and approximately 12 hours before they both died for real. The sound of hoofbeats made her freeze. She peered around the edge of the crypt. A horse was approaching the cathedral. No, multiple horses. A group of riders cresting the hill, moving fast. Hunters. Had to be. She could see the crossbows, the silver weapons glinting in the morning sun. Perfect. From certain death to more certain death. But as they got closer, Lyria noticed something odd. The lead rider wasn't dressed like a hunter. She wore traveling clothes, plain and practical, with a heavy cloak despite the warm morning. and she was old, 70 at least, with white hair braided down her back. The riders stopped at the cathedral entrance. The old woman dismounted with surprising grace and surveyed the destruction, the broken doors, the rubble, the bodies that had already turned to ash. "Well," she said in a voice like gravel and honey, "someone had a busy night." One of the younger hunters, a man with a crossbow, moved toward the cathedral entrance. "Lady Yaga, wait. There could be. I know exactly what's in there, boy. 5 vampires waiting for nightfall." And somewhere out here her sharp eyes scanned the graveyard. "Ah, there." She was looking directly at Lyria's hiding spot. Lyria's blood froze. She recognized that voice now. Grandmother Yaga, from Thornhaven. The old woman who'd warned the village they'd made a terrible mistake. "Come out, child," Grandmother Yaga called, "and bring the vampire king with you. Carefully. I have 6 hunters here who are very eager to collect that bounty on his head." Lyria didn't move. "Or don't," the old woman continued, "and I'll tell these nice hunters exactly where you're hiding. Your choice." Cursing under her breath, Lyria stood. "He can't move. He's badly injured." "Then drag him. I haven't got all day." With great effort, Lyria managed to pull Adrastus out from behind the crypt. He was dead weight, his head lolling against her shoulder. The hunters immediately raised their crossbows. "Hold," Grandmother Yaga commanded. She walked forward, moving between Lyria and the weapons without flinching. Up close, her eyes were a startling pale blue, sharp as broken glass. Well, well. The Vampire King reduced to this. How the mighty have fallen. "If you're here to kill him, get it over with," Lyria said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. "Kill him? Child, I'm here to save his ungrateful undead life." Grandmother Yaga crouched, examining Adrastus's wounds with a practiced eye. "Sun poisoning, blood loss, and general stupidity. He'll live if we can get him somewhere dark for the next few hours." She stood. "You there, boy. Help the girl get him onto a horse." The young hunter looked confused. "But Lady Yaga, the bounty. The bounty can wait. Right now we have bigger problems." She gestured to the cathedral. "There are 5 vampires in there planning to perform a blood ritual at sunset. If they succeed, they'll crown a new vampire king, one who actually wants to wage war on humanity. I'd rather keep the devil I know, thank you very much." "You want to help him?" Lyria couldn't believe what she was hearing. "Your village tried to sacrifice me to him." "Yes, and that was colossally stupid. As I told them at the time." Grandmother Yaga's expression softened slightly. "I'm sorry for what they did to you, child. But right now we need to focus on not dying. Questions later, survival now." "Agreed." Lyria looked at Adrastus, unconscious and vulnerable. Then at the cathedral, where Morgana and the others waited like spiders in a web. "Agreed," she said. They rode to a small stone chapel half a mile away, abandoned but intact, with a cellar that was cool and dark. The hunters carried Adrastus down while Grandmother Yaga drew symbols on the door in what looked like salt. "What is that?" Lyria asked. "A ward. Won't stop them if they really want to get in, but it'll slow them down. Give us warning." The old woman finished the last symbol. "Now, while your vampire sleeps, you and I need to talk." They sat in the chapel above the cellar. The hunters kept watch outside. "That curse on you," Grandmother Yaga began without preamble. "It wasn't created to torment Adrastus. It was created to control him." Lyria blinked. "What?" "Think about it. A girl with his dead wife's face appears exactly when he wakes up? That's not coincidence. Someone engineered this." She leaned forward. "The vampire court, or at least part of it, wanted Adrastus awake but controllable. They thought if they dangled you in front of him, he'd either drain you and become their puppet through the power restoration, or refuse and fracture the cord enough that they could overthrow him. They were planning this for 30 years. Longer. The witch who cursed your bloodline? She was paid by vampires." Grandmother Yaga's expression was grim. "Your whole life, child, You've been a pawn in a game you didn't know was being played. But the ritual at the mausoleum, Father Dominic said it could break the curse. Oh, it can. But not the way he thought. The old woman stood and began pacing. The ritual doesn't just break the curse on you. It severs the magical connection between Adrastus and Alira's memory entirely. Which means, understanding hit Lyria like a physical blow. Which means he'll lose his connection to his past. His memories of her. Not all of them, but enough. Grandmother Yaga nodded. That's why Morgana is so desperate to perform the ritual her way. With your blood and a new king. Because if Adrastus completes it his way, choosing to let Alira go, he'll be free. Truly free. And a free vampire king is the most dangerous thing the court can imagine. Lyria looked toward the cellar where Adrastus lay unconscious. So what do we do? Grandmother Yaga smiled, and it wasn't a nice smile. We beat them to the mausoleum. And we finish what they started. Adrastus woke to voices arguing above him. Absolutely insane. You want to take him back to the cathedral? Where 5 vampires are waiting to kill us all. Not the cathedral, boy. The mausoleum beneath it. There's a difference. A difference that will get us killed. Adrastus opened his eyes. He was in a cellar, stone walls, cool air, blessedly dark. Every part of his body ached in ways he'd forgotten were possible. The wounds were healing, but slowly. Too slowly. He sat up, and the voices above went silent. Footsteps on stairs. Then Lyria appeared, relief flooding her face. You're awake. Unfortunately, his voice was rough. Where are we? A chapel. Grandmother Yaga from Thornhaven brought hunters. They helped us escape. Helped us, he processed that. Why? Because I'm old enough to know when to bet on the lesser evil, a new voice said. An elderly woman descended the stairs, moving with the confidence of someone who'd stared down worse things than vampires. You're the vampire king. But those creatures in the cathedral? They're something worse. Revolutionaries who think vampire supremacy is the answer to all their problems. Adrastus studied her. You're a witch. Was. Retired now. Mostly. Grandmother Yaga crossed her arms. Your girl and I have been talking. We have a plan. I don't like plans made while I'm unconscious. You're going to like this one even less, Lyria said. She knelt beside him, meeting his eyes. We go back to the mausoleum. We complete the ritual. We break the curse. We already knew that was the goal. All of it, Lyria interrupted. The ritual that breaks the curse on me also severs your connection to Alira's memory. Permanently. You'll lose pieces of her, maybe all of her. But you'll be free. Adrastus went very still. How do you know this? Because I know how blood magic works, Grandmother Yaga said. And because 30 years ago, I knew the witch who created this curse. She told me things before she died. Things I've kept quiet because knowledge like that is dangerous. She paused. But Morgana and her rebels know it too. That's why they're so desperate to complete the ritual their way. They need to stop you from doing it yours. My way kills Lyria. No, Grandmother Yaga said firmly. Their way kills Lyria. Your way requires sacrifice, yes, but not her life. Your memories. Your past. Your connection to the woman you loved for 300 years. The cellar fell silent except for the distant sound of horses outside. How long until sunset? Adrastus asked finally. For hours, Lyria said. And you want to walk into a trap outnumbered, while I'm still recovering from nearly dying, to perform a ritual that will strip away the one thing I've held on to for centuries. He looked at Lyria. Do I have that right? Yes. And if I say no, then at sunset, Morgana and the others will crown a new king with my blood, start a war between vampires and humans, and probably kill us both anyway. Lyria's jaw set. At least this way we're choosing how it ends. Adrastus laughed. A short, sharp sound without humor. You've gotten braver. I've gotten tired of being a victim. He stood, testing his legs. They held barely. Then we'll need weapons. And a strategy that doesn't end with all of us dead. Grandmother Yaga smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. They approached the cathedral as the sun touched the western horizon. 5 hunters, 1 witch, 1 vampire king, and 1 cursed girl. The hunters carried crossbows loaded with silver bolts and wooden stakes strapped to their belts. Grandmother Yaga had a pouch of herbs and powders that Adrastus suspected were more dangerous than any weapon. Lyria carried a knife she clearly didn't know how to use, but her hands were steady. Adrastus carried nothing but his own fading strength and centuries of killing experience. They'll know we're coming, he said quietly. Good, Grandmother Yaga replied. Let them prepare. It won't matter. They entered through the main doors, no stealth, no subtlety. Morgana and her 4 remaining vampires stood waiting in the nave, positioned around the entrance to the mausoleum stairs. How touching, Morgana called out. The dying king returns with his little army of mortals. What's your plan, Adrastus? Have them shoot us while you catch your breath. Something like that, he kept walking forward, and the hunters fanned out on either side. Or you could step aside and let us pass. To the mausoleum? So you can complete the ritual and free yourself. Morgana laughed. I don't think so. That ritual is ours. The girl's blood is ours. And by midnight, the vampire throne will be. 3 crossbow bolts hit her simultaneously. She staggered back, shrieking, clawing at the silver embedded in her shoulder, chest, and thigh. The other vampires lunged forward and ran straight into Grandmother Yaga's powder. She threw it in a wide arc. Where it touched vampire skin, it sizzled like acid. The vampire screamed and recoiled. Garlic, silver dust, and ground rowan berries, the old witch said pleasantly. An old recipe but effective. Go! Adrastus grabbed Lyria's hand and ran for the mausoleum entrance. The hunters covered their retreat, firing bolt after bolt, keeping the vampires back. They plunged down the stone stairs into darkness. Behind them, Morgana's screams of rage echoed through the cathedral. Stop them! Don't let them reach the altar. Footsteps on the stairs, fast and human. The vampires were coming. Adrastus and Lyria ran deeper into the mausoleum, into the ancient heart of the structure where Illyria had been laid to rest 3 centuries ago. Where this would all finally end. One way or another. The mausoleum opened into a vast circular chamber carved from living rock. At its center stood a stone sarcophagus, untouched by time, with Illyria's name carved in silver lettering that still gleamed in the torchlight. Above it, the ceiling had partially collapsed, revealing the night sky. Stars glittered through the gap like distant, uncaring eyes. There! Grandmother Yaga gasped, stumbling down the last steps behind them. Blood ran from a cut on her forehead. The altar. Quickly before vampires poured into the chamber. Not just Morgana's 4. More, at least a dozen, emerging from side passages Lyria hadn't noticed. They'd been waiting. Hiding. Casimir stepped out from behind Illyria's sarcophagus, his silver hair perfect despite the chaos above. Did you really think we wouldn't anticipate this, old friend? Adrastus positioned himself between Lyria and the assembled vampires, though he swayed slightly. How many did you bring? Everyone who matters. Everyone who understands that your time is over. Casimir spread his hands. Surrender the girl. Let us complete the ritual properly. We'll even let you live, stripped of your title but alive. You can fade into obscurity with your conscience intact. No. Then you'll die with her. And for what? A human you've known for mere days? She's not Illyria, Adrastus. She'll never be Illyria. I know. Adrastus's voice was steady. That's the point. He attacked. But this time he wasn't fighting to win. He was fighting to buy time. Adrastus crashed into the nearest vampires like a hurricane, pulling their attention, drawing them away from Lyria and the altar. He was a blur of violence, tearing, breaking, destroying, but there were too many. For every vampire he dropped, 2 more took its place. Lyria! Grandmother Yaga grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the sarcophagus. The ritual. We have to start now. I don't know how. I'll guide you. But we need his blood and yours, mixed on the altar stone. Do you have the knife? Lyria pulled out the small blade. Her hands shook. Behind them, Adrastus roared in pain. She spun to see him pinned by 3 vampires, another driving a blade into his side. He threw them off but barely. Focus. Grandmother Yaga snapped. If we don't do this, his sacrifice means nothing. Lyria turned back to the altar. The sarcophagus lid was carved with intricate symbols, circles within circles, words in a language she couldn't read. Your blood first, Grandmother Yaga instructed. The cursed bloodline must offer willingly. Lyria drew the knife across her palm. Pain flared bright and sharp. Blood welled up, and she pressed her hand to the cold stone of the sarcophagus lid. The symbols began to glow. Soft at first, then brighter, pulsing with each beat of her heart. The light spread across the stone like veins, beautiful and terrible. Now his, Grandmother Yaga said. But he has to give it willingly. He has to choose. A vampire crashed into them, snarling. Grandmother Yaga went down hard, her head cracking against the stone floor. She didn't move. No. Lyria scrambled toward her, but the vampire grabbed her ankle and yanked her back. Stupid girl, the vampire hissed. Did you really think? His head exploded. Adrastus stood there, breathing hard, his hand still outstretched from the blow that had caved in the vampire's skull. He was covered in wounds, bleeding from a dozen places, barely standing. But his eyes were clear. The ritual, he said. Tell me what to do. Lyria pulled herself up. Your blood. On the altar. But Grandmother Yaga said. I know what it costs. He moved to the sarcophagus, his hand already bleeding from the fighting. I've always known. He pressed his palm next to hers on the glowing stone. The world exploded with light. Lyria felt it like a shockwave, power radiating out from the altar, washing over everything. The vampires attacking them stumbled back, shielding their eyes. Images flooded Lyria's mind. Not her memories, his. She saw Lyra, beautiful, laughing, alive. Saw her in a garden, flowers in her hair. Saw her dancing at a ball, her dress spinning. Saw her dying, pale and still. Adrastus holding her hand as the life left her eyes. Saw 300 years of grief, of rage, of a man who'd turned himself into a monster because he couldn't bear to be human without her. And then she felt something break. Like a chain snapping. Like a door opening. Like taking a breath after drowning for centuries. The light flared one final time, then vanished. Adrastus collapsed to his knees, gasping. The symbols on the sarcophagus had gone dark. But Lyria felt different, lighter somehow. She looked at her hands, and the faint marks that had always been there, the ones that matched paintings of Alira, were gone. Just gone. The curse, she whispered. It's broken. Behind them, Casimir made a sound of pure rage. No. No, you've ruined everything. But Adrastus was laughing. A strange, broken sound that might have been closer to sobbing. He looked up at Lyria, and his eyes were different. Still ancient, still carrying weight, but clearer. Freer. I can't remember her face, he said, wonder in his voice. I know she existed. I know I loved her. But I can't. I can't see her anymore. I'm sorry, Lyria said. Don't be, he stood, and despite his wounds he seemed stronger. For 300 years I've been haunted. Now, he looked at his hands, at the blood still dripping from them. Now I'm just a vampire. No curse. No prophecy. No destiny. Just you, Lyria finished. Just me. Casimir screamed and charged. But Adrastus was ready. He turned, caught the older vampire mid-lunge, and with a strength that shouldn't have been possible for someone so wounded, he snapped Casimir's neck. The ancient vampire crumbled to dust. The others stared in shock. Anyone else? Adrastus asked quietly. One by one the vampires fled into the darkness. In the silence that followed, Lyria and Adrastus stood in the ruined mausoleum, both of them bleeding, both of them free. Finally, impossibly free. They left the mausoleum at dawn. Grandmother Yaga had a concussion but was alive, propped between two hunters who'd survived the fighting. 3 others hadn't been so lucky. They buried them in the cathedral graveyard with quiet words and heavy hearts. Morgana and her remaining vampires had vanished into whatever holes creatures like them crawled into when their plans collapsed. Casimir's dust had scattered in the wind, his centuries of scheming reduced to nothing. And Adrastus. Lyria watched him as they walked down the road away from the mausoleum. He moved differently now, still graceful, still inhumanly strong, but there was something lighter about him. Like a weight he'd carried so long he'd forgotten it was there had finally been lifted. "You're staring," he said without looking at her. "You're different." "Am I?" He glanced at her, a slight smile on his lips. "Or am I finally just myself?" They walked in comfortable silence for a while. The hunters had gone ahead, giving them space. Grandmother Yaga had returned to Thornhaven with promises to knock sense into those fools. It was just the 2 of them now on an empty road with the whole world ahead. "What will you do?" Lyria asked eventually. "Now that you're free." Adrastus was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know," he admitted. "For 300 years my entire existence was defined by loss, by grief, by clinging to something I could never get back." He looked at his hands, flexing his fingers like he was seeing them for the first time. "Now I feel like I'm learning to exist all over again. Is it frightening?" "Terrifying," he laughed softly. "But also exhilarating." They crested a hill and stopped. Below them the road split in 3 directions, north toward the mountains, east toward the coast, south back toward Thornhaven. "And you?" Adrastus turned to face her fully. "What will you do, Lyria?" The question hung in the air between them. She'd been so focused on survival, on breaking the curse, that she hadn't thought about what came next. "I could go home," she said slowly. "Back to Thornhaven. My mother wants me to come back. She sent a letter with Grandmother Yaga." She touched her pocket where the folded paper rested. "She's sorry. They're all sorry. But they buried me alive." The words came out flat, emotionless. "They chose fear over me. And I don't know if sorry is enough to make me forget waking up in that coffin, suffocating, knowing my own family put me there." Adrastus nodded slowly. "Some things can't be forgiven. Not right away. Maybe not ever." "Does that make me cruel?" "It makes you human," he smiled sadly. "You deserve to feel what you feel, to take the time you need. They don't get to dictate your forgiveness just because it would make them feel better." Lyria looked at him, this ancient king who'd protected her from the moment he freed her, who'd fought armies for her, who'd sacrificed his own past to give her a future. "There's something I need to tell you," Adrastus said suddenly. His expression had turned serious. "The ritual. It didn't just break the curse." Her stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "The magic that kept me immortal was tied to Alira's death. To my grief. When I let that go, he took a breath he didn't need. I'm still a vampire. I'm still stronger and faster than humans. But I'm not eternal anymore. I'll age now. Slowly, but I will age. In 50 years, maybe 100, I'll die." Lyria stared at him. "You knew this would happen." "I suspected. And you did it anyway." "Yes," he said it simply, like it was the most obvious choice in the world. "You deserve to be free. That mattered more than my immortality." Something cracked open in Lyria's chest. Something warm and terrifying and entirely new. She'd spent her whole life being told her value came from how she looked, from the curse she carried. But Adrastus had seen past all of that, had chosen her freedom over his own eternity. "You're an idiot," she said, her voice thick with emotion. He laughed. "Probably. A noble, self-sacrificing idiot. Definitely." She stepped forward and hugged him. He went rigid with surprise, then slowly, carefully, His arms came up to hold her back. "Thank you," she whispered into his chest. "For what?" "For seeing me. Not Alira. Not the curse. Just me." His arms tightened slightly. "You made that easy." They stood there for a moment, two broken people who'd somehow found wholeness in each other. When they finally pulled apart, Adrastus gestured to the crossroads. "So, which road?" Lyria looked at the three paths. Then she looked at him. "You're going to wander, aren't you? Learn who you are without the grief." "That was my plan." "And where will you go?" "Anywhere. Everywhere. I have time even if it's no longer infinite," he paused. "But there's something I need to ask you first." "What?" "Would you?" He seemed to struggle with the words. "Would you want to come with me? Not as my responsibility, not as someone I'm protecting, but as a companion, a friend, someone who chooses to be there." Lyria felt tears prick her eyes. "Are you asking because you want me to come? Or because you think I have nowhere else to go?" Both. His honesty was disarming. "But mostly because I think we could be good for each other. You help me remember what it means to be human. And maybe I can help you remember that being cursed doesn't define you." She looked back at the road to Thornhaven, toward family who'd betrayed her, toward a village that had sacrificed her. Then she looked at Adrastus, at the vampire who'd given up eternity for her freedom. "Okay," she said. "Okay. I choose to stay. Not because I must, but because I want to." His smile was like sunrise, slow, warm, full of possibility. They turned away from all three roads and walked straight forward, cutting across the grass toward the horizon, creating their own path. Behind them, the world they'd left was healing. Villages would stop living in fear. The vampire court would rebuild, hopefully wiser. Lyria's family would learn to live with their guilt. And ahead of them was everything else. Unknown. Unwritten. Beautiful in its uncertainty. "Where are we going?" Lyria asked. "I have no idea," Adrastus admitted. She grinned. "Good. Neither do I." They walked forward together. A vampire learning to be mortal, and a girl learning to be free, into a future they would write themselves. One step at a time. One choice at a time. One day at a time. Finally blessedly free. The end.